For a lesson today, we're going to look at a lesson entitled Beware of Covetousness. And I chose it, because, I haven't talked about covetousness for a long time. Every now and then, I keep track of my sermons and in classifications of things, and I try at least every month to bring a lesson on Christ in particular. I try to do some what I call Christian thought lessons at least once a month. Do some character studies maybe once every 2 months, but just to talk about a sin, whatever, try to pop something up. And I thought after Thanksgiving and all, and as we head into the Christmas season, no, that's not really why I did it. I did it because I needed something quick. I had something else picked out and I didn't like it. And well, tell you what, Charlie, I had a 9-point lesson that I started working on, and I got down when I got to point number 5. Point number 5 was missing, and I had to scrap it and start over. So I chose a 3-point sermon just for you, Charlie.
The Lord blesses me.
It sure does, doesn't it? Yeah. Things like that do happen. But it is, it's good to look at lessons like this. It's something that I need to look at, because covetousness is in the eye of the beholder sometimes. It's easy to understand the concept of covetousness when other people's things are being viewed and other people's actions are being viewed. That person's very covetous, but when we look into our own lives, it's, not me, it can't be me. And so Jesus teaches us how to take that concept to the next level and really do some introspection in the passage that we're going to look at today. Luke chapter 12, verse 13 through 15. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he, that's Jesus, said to him, "Man, who made me a judge and arbiter over you?" Now, that's an earthly judge and arbiter. Okay, like we have civil courts, we have probate courts and all, and that's what Jesus is talking about here. And he said to them, then Jesus says to the crowd, "Take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." So Jesus was not going to intervene in a matter of civil law concerning an inheritance received by these two brothers. Now, the title of the lesson is, I'm going to go back here, Beware of Covetousness. The English Standard Version says, take care and be on guard against all covetousness. Okay? The King James, the New King James says beware of covetousness, but how do you beware of covetousness? Well, you got to shine light on it, right? If something's in the dark, and we've talked about it before, you wake up in the middle of the night and it's dark, and if you're in your bedroom where you always are, the path to the bathroom, but if somebody's moved something in your way, and you don't shine some light on it, you might trip over it, what have you. So what do we do if we want to understand something? Well, we shine some light on it. And what's the best way to understand a biblical topic is to shine the light of God's Word on it. So here's Jesus being asked to intervene in a civil matter, and he says, I'm not going to touch it. That's a civil matter. I'm here, Jesus is saying, about moral matters, about ethical matters. That's what I want to talk about. I'm here about sinful things. I'm here about righteousness. Now, the inheritance laws of the Jews were very strict, and the civil authorities, the civil magistrates of the land, interpreted them very strictly. Now, where did it come from? In particular, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 15 through 17. And it might seem a little bit strange, But it goes back to some of the earlier teachings, even in the patriarchal age. Remember Abraham, how that he had some sons. He had Ishmael. Ishmael was the oldest, and then comes Isaac, and then you have Jacob and Esau, Isaac's sons. And Esau was older, and Esau had the birthright. He was supposed to get the double portion. He's supposed to be the next leader, but he wasn't a very good person, a righteous person. Jacob kind of tricks him and gets the inheritance, but or at least the birthright inheritance. There's some strange things going on around. But here's what the law of Moses then says. If a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and that's kind of like Jacob, right? Remember how Joseph was loved and Benjamin more than some of the others? And both the loved and the unloved have borne him children, and if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then on the day when he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved as the firstborn in the preference to the son of the unloved, who is the firstborn, but he shall acknowledge the firstborn and the son of the unloved by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the first fruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. So in other words, throughout their traditions and then their law, the firstborn son got a double portion. So let's talk about the 12 sons of Israel. When Jacob died, all his possessions were divided up 13 ways. Okay? And the oldest son got a double portion, and all the rest, the other 11, got a single portion. Now, that's easy to understand, right? And Joseph didn't get a double portion because he was loved more than, I believe Reuben was the first, wasn't he? Okay? So, that's how it worked out, and that's the way then the law was stated. It's like, well, I love Joseph, so I'm going to give Joseph more. Now, when it comes down to some other matters, okay, you go to the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 7, which we talked a little bit in Bible study last week and a little bit today, you'll see that Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are both are. Well, no, I'm not even going to get into there. Okay, but just going back to this, we can see how this double portion, the oldest son gets the double portion. So for some reason, this man who speaks up to Jesus while Jesus is teaching, just out of the crowd, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. For some reason, he felt that he had not received his just share. Whether he was the oldest son and didn't get the double portion, whether he was the youngest son, got a regular portion and thought that maybe his brother should have allowed him to have more. We don't know the circumstances of it, do we? Because that's not what Jesus was emphasizing. If he really felt this was wrong, what he should have done was gone to the civil courts, right? This wasn't a matter, okay, and today we would say, oh, that's not a matter for the church. I one time had to deal with some folks. There was something that happened because of a funeral meal. When there's a funeral, sometimes the church helps prepare a meal, family comes in, whatever, and there was a dispute with another congregation about this funeral meal, and, and I said, wait a minute. No, we're not getting into this. Go talk to the family. That's what it's the family deal. You go talk to the family. You straighten it out with the family, because this is not a church matter at all. And I think that's what Jesus is really saying here. Listen, it's a legal matter. Go to the legal courts. I'm not talking to you about a religious matter here. The religious matter that I want to talk about, I want to talk to everybody about. And we're going to look at it in depth as what Jesus is saying. So whatever reason, he expected Jesus to force his brother, or at least try to coerce his brother into doing something, whether right or wrong. Maybe shame him. You did that to your brother? What's the matter with you? But Jesus wasn't interested in hearing this case. He was trying to get the man to understand his purpose on earth was not to judge in a civil matter. They had magistrates to decide the civil law. He would not interfere with them. Okay? Civil law appears God's law, moral law. Now remember, under the law of Moses, sometimes they kind of interconnected, which was good. But yet, there it was. You had that kind of separation between church and state. You take this here, and if it's a religious matter, then you can go to the priest if you need to. So Jesus then turns to the multitude, and he says again, Luke chapter 12, verse 15, New King James Version, beware of covetousness. Hey, let's shine some light on this. Now, okay, we would assume that, well, we know the man who says to Jesus, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me, is in the crowd, right? Do you think maybe the other brother's in the crowd? Maybe he is. Maybe at this time he's kind of like hunkering down because he's ashamed. Okay? Or maybe he's kind of like, wait a minute. What are you talking about? We don't know the reactions, do we? No. But Jesus doesn't address him so much as he does the crowd. He says, hey, beware of covetousness. Let's shine some light on this. And he kind of diffuses maybe tension between the two brothers by making it a general subject rather than the specific. And pointing fingers, saying, hey, let's just talk about covetousness in general. All right? And he's trying to get the man to understand his purpose once again. So the man who asked Jesus to speak to his brother, he's there listening, the other brother's probably there. And though Jesus did not make a judgment, you know what he does? He makes a moral stand, doesn't he? He takes a moral stand. And you know what his stand is? All covetousness is wrong. Doesn't matter if it's a covetousness that is on that has legal standing, or is a covetousness that doesn't have legal standing. Because we don't know what the legal standing of this man is. We don't know if he had a legal claim to what he's asking for or not. That doesn't matter to Jesus. What Jesus is looking at is his heart right? Is his mind right as he's asking me to do this? Is his soul right within him? Why is he asking this question? So he takes the side of moral rightness. Whichever brother was wrong, the problem was covetousness, wasn't it? And that's what Jesus wanted to flesh out. So he tells a parable. It leads, this discussion leads to a parable about a man who was blessed with prosperity. Oh, hey, just about every day I pray for peace and prosperity for me and my family, for the place where I work, for the nation. Why not? Shouldn't we? Peace and prosperity, not bad prosperity, but the good prosperity, that we have what we need, as a nation. Now, sometimes we need to go through hard times. I think our nation needed to go through a Great Depression many years ago because of things that were going on. Probably needed. turned a lot of people to God, didn't it? I'll put it that way. Maybe we need another one. I don't know. We'll let God take care of that. But, sometimes you need that purging in society. But here's a man, this parable, it's about a man who's blessed with prosperity. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with being prosperous, nothing necessarily wrong with being rich. Abraham was a rich man, wasn't he? Job was a rich man, wasn't he? Joseph of Arimathea was a rich man. The Bible speaks favorably of all of them, but they were people whom their riches did not control them. They controlled their riches. In other words, they controlled what they were blessed with rather than what they were blessed with controlling them. The biblical teaching deals more with an attitude about wealth and riches than what it does about the getting of material wealth, and what you do with it. It's the attitude about it. What's the attitude there? So, what does the parable say? And here's the key. The man's ground produced plentifully. Didn't say he suddenly became a good farmer. Didn't say he just, this year he bought seed that was really good, or used the right fertilizer, whatever. Or, everything just hit right, the timing was right and everything. Could have been. But I think what Jesus is trying to get across here is that God blessed him tremendously. So no matter what he did, if he'd have planted bad seed, if he hadn't used any fertilizer at all, if he'd just gone out there and thrown the seed on the ground, it had probably brought forth plentifully. It was God's doing, okay? And Luke chapter 12, verse 16 talks about that. But it was more than he had anticipated, more probably than he had ever dreamed. Because if he'd have thought about it, if he'd have dreamed about it, he wouldn't have done what he does down here, the steps that he eventually takes. All right? Now, here's where he starts going wrong. And he thought within himself. You know what happens when we start thinking within ourselves? We kind of isolate our thoughts, don't we? Right there. And that's a dangerous thing. We don't seek any counsel. We don't study outside on it. We don't look around. Everything's kind of within. And see, that's the New King James Version. The English Standard Version, he thought to himself. But you see how it is? He thought. It seems like he takes a prayerful attitude with this. Oh Lord, God, look, I've got all this stuff. What am I going to do with it? Lord, help me. No, it's contained within his own mind, within his own framework, to the point where he doesn't take the time to thank God. He doesn't think he has the time. He's got this problem. I got all this extra grain. I got to do something. I got to do something now with it. He doesn't really realize that it is a blessing from God. He just knows he's got to do something. He thought to himself. He doesn't ask God's advice. He doesn't look to see what the best use of his produce could be. What shall I do? And there's that big word. And that's where covetousness starts. And you see that himself, I. So what can I do that will be best for me? That's his basic scheming here. That's his thought process. See, it's within. It's nothing reaching out. So he comes to a conclusion. I will do this, which is good. It's good to make decisions, right? You remember the movie John Wayne Hondo, right? Right? All through that movie, what's he saying? Well, you do what you think's best. You do what you think's best. Tells that little boy, you do what you think's best. Yeah, if you think it's best to play with that dog, you go ahead, play with that dog. When it gets bitten, you got bit. Mama says, why'd you let that dog do that? Hey, I told him, you do what you think's best, but you suffer the consequences when you do. Okay? And that's what you have here. I will do this, but because it was all structured within and to himself, this is what I will do. He makes a plan. Not what others would have him to do, not what God would have him to do, what I will do. I will do this. And here's what he decided to do. In verse 18, I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. Now, that's not... Don't think of that like we build barns today. We build barns above ground, don't we? What they did with their granaries, if you go and you look in Egypt, and now, you know what they did? They built them underground. They dig out, and they put like a little roof structure on top. So basically what he did, he took the roof structure off, dug either deeper or bigger around, and put another roof structure on top. He just made, it's like an underground silo, just made it bigger to store his grain. All right? Granaries. And their excavations where grain was stored. They don't get much rain there. They don't have to worry about water flowing into it and ruining the grain. It's easier to tear up an overlying structure and dig bigger holes than to dig new ones. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah, it is. So, but then he decides that, but here's what the purpose of it was and where he goes to, and I will say to my soul in verse 19. And again, look, what's he doing? He's making a self-judgment. I will say to my soul, and I'll just go kind of short circuit this a little bit. I'll say to my soul, man, everything's okay. Everything's good. Man, isn't this good? Now, I'm on the gravy train. It's like I don't even need Social Security now because I got it made. He makes a self-judgment, and how easy it would be for us to get to heaven if we could get there the way that we wanted to go. If I could get to heaven the way I wanted to go, you know what I would do? I would just pick the easiest way to get there.
That's what we all do.
Yeah. Yeah. But I don't get to pick and choose that way. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. So I've got to go his way. I can't go my way. I got to submit to his way. This guy, I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast, or you have much goods, okay? Verse 19. So it's kind of like he's going to retire right there, right? No worries about where his portion will come from. He's got enough to last him forever. Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Here, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. You see that phrase in there?
Amen.
Eat, drink, and be merry. You know what that is? That's the Greek Epicurean phrase. Epicureanism was a philosophy of life that says eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow you're going to die, and that's going to be the end of everything. He forgot about God. He forgot there was going to be a judgment day. That was all life meant to him at this point. I will say to my soul, everything's okay now. Something's wrong here. Epicureans were a class of people who worshiped the good life but cared little for the spiritual. And see, that's exactly where this man went to because of his prosperity. That's where it led him to. God had something to say about it, didn't he? God said to him, fool. Fool, verse 20. God had heard enough of this man's self-glorification, decided to impose his judgment. This night, your soul, that you said, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. You got a made soul. This night your soul will be required of you. You know what that means? Amen. He died that night. And he was going to face God. He's going to face God in judgment. He thought his riches would allow him to live a long, comfortable life of ease. How sad he must now feel to realize that all of his work, all of his accomplishments, which were really God blessing him, now he must present his soul before the judgment bar of Christ. He thought he had it made. Someone wrote somewhere along the line about this, snatched from a world of pleasure and thrust into a world where there is no pleasure and where wealth cannot purchase one moment's ease. How terrible that is. All that grain, all that produce couldn't buy him anything on the day of judgment. God says, then whose will those things be which you have provided? Verse 20. It's understandable he can't take his physical goods with him, and even if he could, they'd do him no service there. That'd be no good. Remember we talked about heaven? You know, heaven's such a place that gold is so worthless they paved the streets with it. Right? So what good would it do him there? Usually the goods are left for the inheritors to fight over. Wouldn't it be ironic if these two men who were, especially this one who is talking about the inheritance, these two men were the sons of this man who's now passed, and they're fighting over the inheritance of the man whose land had brought forth plentifully and now has died. Wouldn't that be ironic? Usually the goods are left for the inheritors to fight over as much as in the original case that brought this parable. More than once it has taken less effort for relatives to dispose of a man's wealth than it took for him to acquire it. Yeah, a man can work all of his life to save $1 million to give to his children at his death, and they can run through it in a few days.
Amen.
It just does. So, needless to say, his wealth is the least of his worries now. So, kind of a moral to it. Jesus says, so is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. And that isn't even talking about giving or paying tithes. Okay? And I've known a lot of people who say, oh, I give my tithes so that God could bless me more. It's not even about that. Remember, the thrust of what Jesus is talking about is the moral attitude. Okay? It's not about, I give 10% or I give 20% or I give half. No, it's the attitude about it. And it's the righteousness that is there toward God in the first place. What was this man's real problem? What caused God to take such a drastic action? This man mistook his physical body for his soul, there in verse 19. That was the big mistake that he made. Let's remember, this body, it houses our soul. Our soul maybe even is kind of a part of, God formed the body out of the dusty earth, breathed into the nostrils, and man became a living soul. It's a part of us, but it's a part that goes on when this body is gone. Luke 12:15, and he said to them, okay, again, take care, be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So, hey, listen, a little bit of light shining on this, just for us to take with us, to kind of remember, to look, so that we can be aware, so that we can watch in our own lives that we don't get overtaken by this again, because Satan, he's pretty wise, isn't he? He's pretty tricky. And sometimes he throws that bait out there and we don't even notice it. So, hey, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. If you have a need, would you please make your requests known as we stand and sing the invitation.